Hi, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining in the session today. So we are looking at starting a new unit, which is the Unit 2 in Level 3 Diploma in Business. And this unit, we are going to be covering in about 6 sessions. There are 5 learning outcomes. What you see on your screen right now is the unit specification for how businesses and organizations work. It's a 10 credit unit, and obviously it's a graded unit, so you can achieve pass, merit, and distinction. Just some basic housekeeping tips. If you're asking any questions, please, if you're not asking any questions, please mute your microphones in the background to reduce the background noise. And if you do need to ask me questions, please do unmute yourself, and also you can ask me questions through the chat route. Now, this particular unit, we are going to be looking at 5 learning outcomes. Today, we are looking at covering learning outcome 1, which is going to cover the 3 assessment criteria along with it, 1.1, 1.2, and 1M1. Tomorrow we're going to be later today we're going to be looking at learning outcome 2 and then learning outcome 3, 4, and 5, and that will be followed by an assignment discussion session. I've got the books and the presentations which are updated on Moodle, and you should be able to refer to them for any additional reading and for self-study. So these slides are quite detailed, but at the end of the day, you would still need to study a few bits and pieces in order to look at I would say details of the frameworks, key theoretical frameworks, and obviously some examples. And they would be coming across from the books that have been uploaded and recommended by ATHE. So you've got Accounting for Non-Accountants. There is David Horner's Accounting for Non-Accountants also available. This will be available in a .mobi format. So you should be able to open on your mobile phone. And then we have, some useful resources which are going to come in from tutor2u.net and BBC Bite Size, which is a great website, to glean some information related to some of the topics that are going to be covered in this unit. There are 5 learning outcomes, and then followed by an assignment brief and a workbook. If those of you who want to do the assignment in a workbook route can actually do that and use that as a Word document. So when you click, it'll download to your PC, and it should allow you to open it into a Microsoft Word document, and then you'd be able to, obviously answer the questions which have been set as tasks. So it'll be a question answer format. Now, there is one particular book on business environment that will also be uploaded in a couple of minutes, and that should be visible here. And that would complete the set of books which are essentially required for additional reading. Although these are all academic books, but you wouldn't be required to study the entire book. There would be chapters that are going to be related to learning outcomes, and we could do some signposting for them towards the end of the slides or the presentations, which are in the plenary. And they would allow you to understand which chapters you have to go through in order to develop a deeper understanding of what is being taught in this particular unit. I'll switch you back to the unit specification for a minute. So when you look at the unit specification for learning outcome 1, we've got understand the objectives of organization. Now, before I get into that, I also want to do a bit of a quick introduction in terms of, how businesses and organizations work. Now, this is a particular part of the unit in business course wherein we need to understand, what are the basic skills required to run a business. And for those of you who are running either your own businesses or at some stage, looking at running your own businesses, what will be useful for you to study this particular unit, because what it will give you a good understanding of is what businesses comprise of today, what are the different types of businesses, how do business employ staff or employees, and obviously there are different types of stakeholders in business, which include employees, managers, entrepreneurs, or obviously board members, and in some cases external stakeholders like unions, banks, and the government. What you'll also be looking at in this particular unit would be to understand how you would need to work effectively in a business. How do you set up your business, and how do you then effectively work as an employee and also make your employees and staff work within the business. It will include, facets of first understanding what are businesses, types of businesses, and what are the various objectives of why businesses are set up. In the second learning outcome, we're going to be looking at customer service, because all businesses are set up to make profits. And essentially, it's the customers which allow you to make profit. So what we are going to be looking at understanding is the requirement of customer service, and how effective your customer service can be to increase and obviously align with your business objectives. In the third learning outcome, we are going to be looking at understanding organizational structures and legal status of businesses. So organizational structures would mean things like, does your organization have a flat structure, hierarchical structure, functional structure, or, it is a matrix structure? We go into details, but just overview right now. And then legal entity and the legal type of businesses. And how do you set up as an entity? Is it a sole trader partnership, limited liability company, limited company, corporation, or a non-for-profit company? So these are various forms of legal entities that can be formed, charities, for example, in the UK, and that is what we're going to be studying in Learning Outcome 3. Learning outcome 4 is all about human resources. So at some stage, when you do have employees and workers within your organization, you need to understand how do you align workers with the aims and objectives, the mission of the organization. How would you use various resources? So human resources is one of the resources that would be utilized or would be working within your organization and business. But you have other resources like physical, administrative, technological, financial resources. And we'll go into a bit of detail to understand how you arrange resources for your organization to be able to work effectively and obviously, accomplish the objectives which have been set year on year on an annual basis or when you've set up your business. And then last but not the least, that the learning outcome 5 is associated with, the basics of accounting and finance. So when you run a business as an entrepreneur, as an owner, as a director, you're also looking at, managing your finances. And these finances would come across in 3 different types of main statements. These 3 main statements would include profit and loss account. It would include a balance sheet and a cash flow statement. So we look at some of the details, of these statements specifically when we do discuss, learning outcome 5. And what we'll also be looking at is the preparation of budgets. So in most cases, when you look at setting together a budget, or, you do some sort of an appropriation of funds that are going to be put into the business to start working in the business, or in some cases, essentially looking at funding the activities of the business, then we will need to look at creating budgets. And these budgets could be of different types. And their main aim and purposes is what we need to understand, along with understanding the different forms of financial statements, which are predominantly in Learning Outcome 5. So all in all, there's a good amount of indicative content, but it starts and flows with understanding how organizations are set up, what are the key reasons or strategic reasons and objectives which organizations have, the importance of customers and customer service. Then we go into the legal structure and obviously a type of, so we go into legal status and type of organizational structures, followed by human resources and different types of resources which are required to run a business. And then lastly, we look at a bit of accounting and financial statements to understand how and when would you want, say, for example, budgets to be created, cash to be managed, projections to be done, and those kind of things would essentially come across predominantly from your, 5th learning outcome. So that's an overview of how you would be looking at studying this particular unit. There are 4 aspects of it. One is the general business environment. Second is understanding, customer service. Third is your legal status and organizational structure. 4th is HRM part, and the 5th is accounting part. And towards the end, excuse me, I've got a bad cough. Towards the end, what we are looking at doing is doing a discussion on the assignment, which will be looking at the tasks and activities which have been set up by ATHE in order to obviously give you the opportunity to achieve this particular unit. There's a fair bit of indicative content that is going to be covered in the slides. So when you look at indicative content, learning outcome 1, that's the content which will be covered in the presentation, learning outcome 2, 3, 4, and 5, and so on and so forth. So let's go into now the first learning outcome, which basically focuses on understanding the objectives of the organization. Let me share a PowerPoint slide, which is for learning outcome 1, and this is available on Moodle as well. This particular PowerPoint slide will allow us to cover the indicative content of this particular unit. The first learning outcome focuses on essentially the objectives, why organizations or businesses are set up, and we'll be going into strategic, operational, and tactical aspects of it in terms of why businesses are set up, and that would be the first part that we're going to look at. Now, what I would want to do is basically start off with some key terminology in terms of understanding what is the meaning of the word objective. So when we look at the meaning of the word objective, if you look at literally the dictionary meaning of the word objective, it basically means you're working towards, or you're trying to strive towards a goal, or you're going to take some actions or complete some activities, and they would be primarily looking at helping you achieve a goal. Now, another definition that we look at from a military objective is, or military perspective, is strategic position which the army or the armed forces sometimes try to achieve in order to get a goal accomplished. And that would be the literal dictionary definition of the word objective. Now, this is quite important in this particular unit, is because we're going to be looking at understanding what are the objectives, of why the organizations are set up. Now, sometimes what we do is, if you decide that I want to open a business, you decide that I want to go into business, or I want to, start off offering certain services as a business. One of the things that you will have to sit down and decide would be, what would be the reasons why your business is being set up, and how would the business or the setup that you do would help accomplish the objectives of your customers. And that is why your customers will be buying your products and services. So when we look at these objectives, sometimes you start looking at the vision and the mission statement of the company or the organization that you're setting up. So mission statement, could be something which the company actually strives to achieve, and it is going to be the ethos of the organization. So if I look at UK Versity, just as an example, the mission of the organization is education empowers lives. Now, we are focused on the fact that education is the main leveler when we talk about people getting access to education. And if they get access to education, it can help them gain skills, and it can help them achieve their aims and objectives that are that they have set in their career path, or obviously as a personal objective for them. Now, when we look at the vision of the organization is primarily to make British education which is to make British education affordable, and then deliver it in a way wherein masses can actually achieve and receive this particular education, and obviously achieve their life's objectives. So we are using technology, you and me, for example, technologies like Zoom today, to be able to deliver this education online on YouTube and obviously elsewhere, and people would be able to study this free of cost, and they would then be looking at achieving their objectives. So when you look at setting up an organization, we are looking at vision and mission. Now, if we go beyond the vision and mission of the organization, this is going to give you the macro overview or the ethos of why the organization or the business is being set up. At some stage, what you need to then do is, excuse me, what you need to then do is to start creating objectives and classifying those objectives as operational, strategic, and tactical. Now, depending on where you will set up your business, you look at location, you look at size, you look at your sector, and you would also look at what would be the ways in which you will reach out to your customer. Now, when we look at setting up an organization, and we look at setting up the business in general, before we go into objectives, your main aim at some stage of setting up the business would be to look at meeting certain objectives that you have. And those could be objectives like profit maximization. So you'll be looking at setting up a business in a way wherein it allows you to make profits from the service that, or products that you're selling. So in some cases, you would look at finding a gap area in the market, and that gap area would allow you to position a product or a service, and that positioning of product or a service would essentially allow you to create the business offering that you would go across to with in the market. You at some stage, assuming if you start a business, and I would suggest that if you guys put on your thinking hats, assuming you've looked at starting a business, and at some stage, what you want to do is, once you've started the business for the first 3, 6, 8, 9 months, after that, what you're looking at is growing and expanding the business. So in the initial few months, you'll be looking at setting it up. You'll be looking at essentially, excuse me, you'll be looking at essentially, scaling it up. But at some stage, what you will decide is that, yes, now the business is set up. There are processes in place. There is a set definite requirement that the business is fulfilling. There are customers which are buying the products, and you would continue to do advertising promotions to be able to create more traction with your customers. And that is basically leading to growth and expansion. Assuming if the business has been set up now for a couple of years, 5, 10, and years, and you would start looking at other areas of the business, things like corporate social responsibility. You'll be looking at how much profit is too much to make, what are the returns that you're providing to your employees or people, and then are you being kind to the planet, or if you're using as a businesses can be of 3 different types: primary, secondary, and tertiary. So if you're a primary business, that means you are in agriculture, fishery, you're using natural resources to be able to, sell those onto either businesses or customers directly. If you're a secondary business, then you would be looking at, obviously, using the raw material which is coming in from the Mother Earth. Say, for example, factories, manufacturing factories, steel factories, they are extracting the material in mines, and obviously some companies are then looking at refining the material. You look at fossil fuels, Aramco and some of the other companies like ExxonMobil, Shell, Texaco, they basically get the oil out of the earth, and then they have refining facilities which are then they sell it to, and they would refine the product and sell it off in the market as diesel, gasoline, or petrol. So there'll be example of secondary business. Tertiary business would be businesses which are using, these services which are coming out as finished products, and then they are using it to primarily sell it to their customers. So tertiary businesses could be service business. They could be business which is primarily using products which have been created by primary and secondary businesses, and then they are looking at selling them in the market. Now, at some stage, businesses, depending on which sector you are in, primary, secondary, or tertiary, you would also look at the corporate social responsibility. So people or businesses which are essentially in, mining, for example, or if they are looking at, in the primary sector, they're looking at extracting material from the Mother Earth. Then in those cases, these businesses would be focused on also driving what is called social responsibility, which is their responsibility towards the environment, so that whenever they are looking at using raw material from the environment, they are essentially ensuring that this is going to be, they will leave their environment in a form which is going to be pristine, and it could be usable for future generations. And those are the bits that you would go into as some of the businesses expand into large corporations or essentially become publicly traded companies. Now, all such objectives that we are discussing might not go into, your own reasons of setting the business, but they are examples of what the businesses would consider depending on where they are in their stage of, expansion, or how big the company is, which sector you are in, and how many customers you serve. At some stage, you would look at customer satisfaction. Now, if you start getting customers, and if customers are not satisfied with your product, your business is not going to do well. You will maybe get good amount of customers initially, but at some stage, the repeat business, the loyalty business would start to die out because the products are not meeting the expectations of the customer, or they're not helping in fulfilling what the customer's needs are. Excuse me. So one of the things would be that if you open up, say, a motor garage, or if you open up a services outlet, one of the key things that you would be looking at is, if it is a services on the motorway, customers do want to take rest, and obviously when they have a halt and they go into the services, they're expecting that they should be able to get fresh food or warm food, and obviously they should be able to get tea, coffee, and some of the other facilities that they would want to use. Now, if these services do not have them, then what you would see is, over a point in time, word would spread. And what generally would be seen is that customers would shun that service, and they would say, oh no, this service is not very good, let's stop at the next one. And that would be because the business is not able to provide the customer satisfaction, not able to provide, the customer satisfaction, or the services are not up to the expectation of what the customers expect when they look at stopping over at that services. The toilets might not be clean, the food outlets might not be serving a good menu or may not be serving hot food, and that is what the preference of customers would be. Then you look at businesses which are set up, which are innovative businesses which are probably service-based. They are businesses which are basically focused on innovation. Their innovation in products and services which they provide essentially tend to be, looking at developing new products or services. So when you look at innovative businesses, when we talk about the iPhone, we talk about the iPad, we talk about, for example, the Vision Pro, which Apple is introducing. We look at Meta introducing the metaverse. These are products which are very innovative, and they are, products which are ahead of their time, wherein the company is trying to position these kind of services, and they feel that customers would have the need for it as technology matures. So in some cases, you would look at these businesses driving basically growth in the economy. And in some cases, what you will also see is that because they are bringing out innovative products which the customers want, and it is making their life easier in the sense that it increases productivity. So it increases productivity, increases efficiency. When customers use their products and work, they would be classed as what are called innovative businesses. And similarly, you could have, when the business is well established, you want to retain and maintain your employee workforce. And in such cases, employee engagement and development programs become quite important, training part of it. For example, in the NHS, one of the key factors which defines the NHS or our national health service is that there is a continuous focus on development and training within the staff by the NHS management. And this is because the NHS management feels that when customers do come in and take, make use of the facilities like hospital, A&E, and other such facilities, they should be able to provide what is called cutting edge services, which means the customers are able to get better. The death rate is low. The service that they get, or the treatment in this case that they get, is something which is meeting the expectations of CQC, Care Quality Commission, and that would be the reason why they would be focused on employee development and engagement programs. This also would help in retaining staff, or good amount of staff which they can retain, because as we know, within lots of businesses, in particular, if you look at tourism and hospitality management, the average cost of training an employee tends to be about £5,500. And that employee, if it ends up leaving in 12 to 18 months, the organizations spend a lot of significant amount of their revenue and profits on engaging and obviously training employees. So if an employee ends up leaving, this tends to be a direct loss to the organization because they've lost a trained employee. And that is why organizations at some stage look at developing what are called reward schemes, motivation, and that is to drive motivation. So incentives, reward schemes are basically schemes which organizations come up with after they have established and they have a number of employees. And that would be to look at driving employee engagement, motivation, and also to ensure that the employees work within the organization for a long-term basis. And in order to keep them sharp on their skills and also up to date with the changes which are happening because of maybe government legislation, changes because of market conditions or economic conditions, then it mandates training and updates to be done. And that is where organizations put the professional development programs, or PPD, or CPD as we call it, career professional development programs, which allow employees to gain skills, increase their responsibility, and over a point in time helps in progression within the organization. Now, when we consider all these objectives, we look at why businesses are set up. This gives us a very good idea that why businesses are set up and why sometimes entrepreneurs or people who start their own businesses at some stage have to look at a very balanced approach in order to ensure that they have a balance between achieving financial objectives, their growth and expansion objectives, ethical operations, making sure that they're meeting customer requirements, and obviously if a business has innovative products or products which are in demand, which help solve customer problems, then the business generally starts to do well because it creates a lot of traction with the customer for its products. And that is where the organizations look at these objectives, which are phased out and include it in the goals of the organization from time to time. So these objectives may not be implemented all in one go, but over a point in time, depending on the size, scale, sector of the business, where you are in terms of the growth, these objectives can be brought into play by the management or the owner of the organization, and that allows the organization essentially to, start, I would say, putting them into play for the purposes of making sure that the business is actually successful. Now, there is a particular video session which is available, which a short video which explains this particular objectives. And what I want to do is obviously play this for you. And that would mean that you would be able to see what we have covered so far, defined pictorially as a video, and explaining why organizations have objectives and why they're important when they are set up. So let's see if we can listen into this particular video. Give me 1 second. Let me share this with you on the screen. And if you're not able to view this now, you can obviously use the link which is given in the slide to be able to watch this particular video, at a later date as well. So give me 1 second. So this is the video that I'm showing, and obviously because of copyright, I'm not looking at playing this particular video right now, but you should be able to essentially watch this 3-minute video, which gives you a summary of what I've explained today in terms of organizational objectives. So let me take you back to the PowerPoint slide, and we'll continue, our discussions on the learning outcome 1 assessment criteria now. Now, the first assessment criteria talks about outline and give examples of what are the differences between operational, tactical, and strategic objectives. Now, when we do talk about organizational objectives, they're quite pivotal for guiding the organization's direction and obviously helping in measuring its performance. Now, these objectives can be categorized into 3 different types, depending on the scope, time frame, and their specificity. Now, if I look at a particular way to categorize them, they would be categorized into 3 different parts. First part would be strategic objectives. Now, these objectives tend to be broad, long-term aims that define the desired future of the organization or desired state of the organization. If I look at what would be the company doing or the business doing in 5 years, how would you see your company and your business doing in 10 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, depending on, from the start. So these are going to be broad, long-term aims that define, the future state of the organization. An example here would be a technology company which might have a strategic objective to become a market leader in wearable technology. Now, if you see Apple introduce the iWatch, and over a point in time, what it wants to do is be a significant player in the wearable technology market from the time it introduced. Now, if you look at the Apple iWatch, and it's been introduced about more than 5 years now, it is the number 1 brand in terms of wearables. When we come to look at under wearables technology, there are lots of them, but in smartwatch category, it is the number 1 brand across the globe. Along with that, I think Samsung and Apple keep changing positions, but they are number 1 as far as that is concerned. So when we look at examples of strategic aims and objectives, we are looking at the company expanding into different markets, expanding its presence in markets by looking at advertising promotions and increasing their product lines. So in the wearable technology market, Apple is now bringing out what is called the Vision Pro. And Vision Pro, if you look at what they're bringing out in terms of Vision Pro, is another device which will allow you to interact with objects on a 3D basis. So I don't know how many of you have looked at it, but the Vision Pro essentially is a device, which will be again within the wearable technology, and that would allow you to essentially look at, interacting with your environment in a 3D environment, and that would allow you to seamlessly blend digital content with your physical space. Now, that is an example of a strategic aim and objective for a company called Apple. And this generally tends to be long-term, which could be 3 to 5 years, and in some cases, 10 years. Now, if you look at Marks and Spencer, they introduced Plan A, which was primarily a plan introduced by Sir Stuart Rose way back in 2014. And in 10 years' time, they wanted to have everything in terms of sustainability being produced within Marks and Spencer. So, for example, they wanted to bring their carbon footprint to zero, which is what they're trying to do. They try to look at recycling a lot of stuff which comes out of their, stores and various outlets, and that is a plan which they've created, which is a 10-year plan for the company. So that's a strategic plan in order to ensure that the company does not have any, does not have a carbon footprint by 2024. Now, when we look at tactical objectives tend to be more specific because they are going into detailing of activities and processes that will contribute to achieving the strategic objectives. So these objectives are normally handled by middle managers or middle management in the organization. And their aim is to basically break down the macro objectives or the long-term objectives which have been set by the management of the company. And their aim is to primarily ensure that these objectives can be detailed out into activities, and these activities can be broken down into responsibilities or roles and responsibilities which could be given to the members of staff working within the organization in order to help achieve the strategic objectives. For example, in this case, the strategic objective of Apple, if we stick to that, is a company, they want to become a market leader in wearable technology. Now, one of the tactical objectives that they would have would be to launch a new smartwatch series every 18 months. And that would mean their product would remain current. Their product would have new and innovative features, which is what the competition is not able to, catch up with. And that would keep this particular product on their side, like the smartwatch, let's say they as a market leader, because they would be introducing innovative features in that watch. And this, in order to do so, their aim would be to keep adding and innovating on the product. And this would be basically done by the product teams in the organization. And that is why it will be tactical objective. So strategic objective is they want to become a market leader. But the tactical objective in that case is to remain a market leader in that segment. And in order to remain a market leader, they have to improve operational efficiency, they have to enhance product quality, features, and they have to reduce production costs so that the product is becoming more affordable and they can launch it in many different countries. And this would allow them to retain their market leader position. Operational objectives. In this case, tactical objectives tend to be what are called short-term actions, and they are designed primarily to impart or look at implementing these strategic objectives, and they are normally departmental. Now, when we talk about operational objectives, they are also short-term goals that are specific. Let me put it this way. These operational objectives will also be helping accomplishing, the long-term objectives or strategic objectives of the organization. But their main is to contribute to specific activities and processes, thereby helping the organization to achieve yearly or annual goals. For example, they tend to be short-term, which is 1 year or less. Tactical objectives tend to be very short-term. That means it could be 1 to 3. It could be, quarterly objective. It could be 6 monthly, 1 year, or 2 year or 3 year objective. So in some cases, you would look at operational objectives to be looking at, when I say a word operational, looking at operational efficiency. So, for example, you have Nissan Motors in Sunderland. They have invested £1 billion in the new car manufacturing plant to produce Nissan Qashqai, and obviously they are moving the facilities onwards to also introducing an electric vehicle or EV vehicle variant. So when we look at, so when we look at EV variant, initially when the production starts, they would be still in the process of setting it up, the additional assembly line, and obviously training the staff. And what would happen is over a point in time within the year, the assembly line would be properly set up, the staff would be trained, it would start to run shifts, and obviously because of the projections and the demand that they're getting from the market, they would need to ramp up production. So here the operational objectives come into place, because they would then, project managers or production managers who work on the floor would be looking at ingenious ways on how they can actually shave off time or reduce the time required to manufacture the cars. So typically in an 8-hour shift, Nissan produces maybe 200 vehicles. they would be looking at, in the initial phases to increase, say, 90 vehicles to 100 to 150, and finally reaching a goal of 200 vehicles. Now, this would involve streamlining activities, processes, and also improving operational efficiency without compromising the quality of the product, and that would allow the company to achieve its operational objectives. So when we talk about objectives in general, we could classify them in three different forms: strategic, operational, and tactical. And this classification helps us in understanding the hierarchical nature of how the organization's objectives are set and how they play a very crucial role in achieving the goals of the organization. These objectives, I would also say, ensure day-to-day activities align with broader goals of the organization. So they are quite important, and understanding them in terms of how do we differentiate between strategic, operational, and tactical would also help me understand my role in the organization, and then help me plan my responsibilities in a way wherein I'm able to contribute in achieving these goals, which are set on an annual basis by the management in the organization. Is that okay? Any questions on this so far? Great. So let's move to the second assessment criteria, which talks about explaining the factors influencing choice of objectives in both profit and non-profit making organizations. So first of all, let's look at understanding what are profit making organizations. Now, when we talk about profit making organizations, and let's look at a few examples. Profit making organization. What is the example of a profit making organization? Profit making organization could be McDonald's, for example. Subway. You look at retail outlets like Marks and Spencer, Tesco, Sainsbury. You look at construction companies. You look at housing companies. You look at airlines, restaurant, retail chains. They're all profit making organizations because they are set up as a business to be able to sell products to consumers and then make profit. Apple, Microsoft, they're all profit making organizations. Now, if I look at non-profit making organizations, they would be organizations which are primarily focused on providing services, but their aim would not be to make money from serving the community or obviously providing these services to the members of public. They could be churches, public organizations, schools, charities. It could be clinics, hospitals, like in the UK NHS. National service is run by the government. It is funded by the taxpayer, and their aim is not to make profits, but their aim is to achieve operational efficiency so that money being spent, taxpayers' money being spent, is utilized to the most efficient and best possible way. So there is no wastage. And these organizations typically tend to provide services to the members of public free of cost. So non-profit organizations are normally organizations which are formed, or government departments, I will put it this way. They are charities, or they could be non-religious organizations, religious organizations. Now, having understood that, what we need to do is differentiate between what are the factors which influence profit making and non-profit making organization. Now, when we talk about profit making organization, we are looking at market conditions. So any private company, any organization, corporation would essentially be focused on understanding what are the economic conditions. How is the economic climate being affected? Currently, there is a full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine, and that has affected, cost across the globe in terms of supply chain. We look at the disturbance which is happening in the Middle East between Houthi rebels and obviously Israel, for example. And what we do get to see is that is having ripple effects all across the globe, because the sea freight and the sea traffic, which is being brought into the Red Sea and the Channel, is being affected because it requires, let's say, patrolling by the US and UK and other, European nations to ensure security of the goods and cargo being transported. So when we look at market conditions, the market conditions tend to be volatile. It means that the price of fuel is changing up, going up and down, and markets are volatile. Now, this would be having an effect on how the Bank of England, sets its base rate. You look at how businesses which are specifically trading within the oil economy sector would work, and how some of the businesses which are dependent on sea freight and goods coming in from China and other countries coming to the UK, how would those affect prices? Because sometimes the goods coming in through the sea freight are being delayed because of security reasons. So these are all market conditions which profit-making organizations, large organizations like Tesco, Sainsbury, Asda would be focused on. Financial performance is another factor, because when we look at money which is required to run the day-to-day operations or the cash flow statements, for example, large companies need to have an employee. They pay what is called employee wages at the end of the month. They have a huge employee wage bill. They have to pay their suppliers, partners. So in order for them to generate enough, how would you pay these bills? These bills will only be payable if the business is generating enough cash flow. That means it is selling good amount of products to its customers. And in turn, these customers are able to then, obviously help generate the cash which is coming into the organization. And that cash coming into the organization would end up paying the bills. And that is where the finance department, the accounts department looks at budgeting, planning, financial planning to ensure that they have enough capital at hand to be able to fund all these activities. Sometimes organizations go to the bank to look at an overdraft, and this could be because they are expanding into other markets. They look at, public issue offerings. They look at listing on the stock exchange, or, obviously, in some cases, looking at, making an initial public offering to their existing shareholders to be able to draw money or to create more capital, and that would be funding the expansion into new markets. So financial performance, at the end of the year, you would see the CFO of the organization. At the end of the quarter, you normally see large organizations, small organizations, they have a meeting wherein in some cases they would normally give out projections for the next quarter. They would say the company is doing well. This is the EBITDA of the company earning before interest and tax and depreciation. They would also give out, statements which will primarily be showing that the company is liquid, sound, and obviously is profitable. And they would shore up the share prices of the organization for those which are trading on the stock exchange. But in general, if we look at a small business, one of the main things which the directors or the management of the organization looks at is how much money is coming in, what are the expenses, what are the deliverables in terms of payables to the partners and suppliers, and is the company operations making profit at the end of the month? And that would be all related to financial performance. Then we look at regulatory environment, which has compliance with laws. If there are changes which are being brought across by the government, you look at regulatory changes, compliance with laws, and ensuring that companies and various departments within companies are meeting those guidelines. One such example will be on the 6th of April 2024, the minimum wage would rise to £11.44. So that would mean all organizations would need to augment their, your pay scale. They would need to look at budgeting for the increase, which is being stipulated because of the cost of living crisis. And the government has now prescribed that all workers need to be paid a minimum wage of 11.44, and if companies do not comply, then there would be fines which could be imposed, and in some cases employees could bring across cases through the unions, and that would be detrimental for the business. So in this case, the organizations have to gear up, they have to budget for it, and they have to start looking at putting steps into place so that they are able to comply when this new minimum wage act allows the wages to be, minimum wage act allows new wages to be started to implement from 6th of April this year. Excuse me. Now, then there are technological changes which profit-making organizations also look at. Now, one of the key things that we've realized over the last 2 decades, 3 decades, is that with the use of technology, performance, efficiency, and productivity can be increased. So organizations need to look at embracing technology, and in some cases, they would need to look at even transformation of technology, or doing away with the old one and bringing the new one in, and that would allow the operations to become more effective. A simple example that I would give you here is if I look at Microsoft, and if you're a Windows user, you've seen that Windows has moved from, say, Windows 2000 to Windows 7, Windows XP to Windows 2000, Windows 7, Windows 10, and Windows 11. Now, at some stage, Microsoft also does away with the updates to the previous operating systems. Now, in some cases, there is no way that Microsoft XP was supported up until 2012, 2013, but after that, Microsoft is not bringing out any updates. So it forced the customers to look at upgrading from XP to 7 to Windows 10. A lot of customers bypassed the middle versions and straight away went to Windows 10. Now, in such cases, the technology becomes a driving part because it increases efficiency. It also looks at increasing, productivity within the organization. And with Windows 11 or 10, when we look at in general, that allows you to log into any device from anywhere as long as you have your user ID, and that allows distributed computing to happen. This also allowed that the Windows client became thin clients. Windows could be installed on a variety of devices, including PCs, tablets, mobile phones, and that these advances in technology also help drive some of the business activities forward. Any questions on this so far? Now let's look at the reverse side, which is to look at non-profit making organization. If I look at an example of charity like Christie's, or if I look at Oxfam, now there the organizations have objectives which are also set, but these objectives are not driven from a point of view of driving profits or making money. These objectives are driven from a point of view of providing services to the community or members of public. Their main mission and vision is to basically provide services in this, say for example, so if I have to do, ask a question that what does Oxfam do, or what is the main aim of Oxfam as an organization? So if you look at Oxfam in general, Oxfam, it's basically a combination of or confederation of 21 independent non-government organizations, or NGOs as we call them, non-government organization, NGO. Their main aim, what is the main aim of Oxfam? So if I look at Oxfam in general, they basically main purpose of setting up Oxfam a good number of years back, 2 decades back, was to ensure that it helps in fighting inequality and to end poverty and injustice. Now, across the regions and regions and local, let's say areas that it works in, it works to basically look at eradicating poverty. It allows, essentially Oxfam to provide assistance in countries like Africa, Middle East, or in some other countries which are still developing, to provide them access. So they deploy resources, funds to be able to provide access to clean drinking water, sanitation, food, and shelter. Now, these were initial objectives of how and why Oxfam was formed. But over the years, the objective of Oxfam has become, so when we look at the forming of Oxfam, it was formed, just during the World War II in the 1940s. And obviously, when we look at the history of this particular organization, if we, tally and track it down from the early 1950s onwards to now, what we do see is that the objectives of the organization have slightly changed. They have become a bit more diverse, but their objectives still remain non-profit. So when we look at they're receiving funding from the government, they have to comply with legal and regulatory requirements. There are stakeholders within the organization, which is government is one of the stakeholders, donors are stakeholders, beneficiaries, broader community are stakeholders, and they all hold accountable Oxfam and Oxfam operations. And what we do get to see is that their main aim today is to look at focus on providing and creating a social impact in terms of making the communities better, providing services in areas which could be services related to, for example, rescue services or conservation services, or services which are related to ending injustice and poverty. And their aim and objectives are primarily fulfilled when they achieve these. For example, in Africa, one of the objectives is to have each and every indigenous community to have access to clean drinking water, sanitation, and food and shelter. Now, how they've achieved the objective over the years, how much has been achieved, what percentage of that has been achieved, is the objectives measurement which this non-profit organization would have. Now, this would also depend on the budgets that they have. This will also depend on, obviously, how much resources they get. But in general, they would be slightly different from how they would be funding, and running these activities. And that is why they would be termed as non-government organizations, not-for-profit organizations. Is that okay? So there, the aim is to balance internal and external expectations of the shareholders, stakeholders, donors, government, but ensuring the services reach each and every part of the organization. Now, they can do creation, or they can generate funds through fundraising. They can do campaigning. They can increase the members in the organization. They can also look at taking on board influencers, which could be different governments and government departments, which would come in and influence how they would get access to funding, and obviously how they would be looking at better advocating, for example, the things that they do in terms of supporting the causes. For example, working closely with the United Nations or the World Health Organization would be a few objectives. We look at size and legal structure of the organization, and this as we see, Oxfam is now expanded to 21 non-government organizations. When it was set up as a charity, but today it is a combination of 21 non-government organizations, and there are a variety of stakeholders and influencers within the organization. Now, some of the reasons why some of these organizations are set up is what we need to cover in the merit assessment criteria, which primarily talks about assessing the factors that lead to change in strategic objectives. So if we stick to the example of Oxfam, what we do generally get to see is that their objectives over the years has changed because the organization has grown. The organization has been merged with several other charities in order to draw larger funds from different departments within the organization, and as their goals and objectives are expanded into removing, say for example, social injustice, poverty, access to clean drinking water and sanitation, they have also done a lot of mergers with other such charities, which allow them to now have a bigger stake in terms of addressing the market, and obviously access to the government funds or maybe donors or stakeholders, which will provide positively towards the organization. Changing market conditions would also mean that sometimes they are not allowed to work in different other geographies. So in such cases, working with another charity or Red Cross, for example, or other similar organizations allows them to, mitigate certain external factors, which could be competition, technological advancements, or regulatory frameworks that they have to adhere to in different markets. Now, one of the things that we need to look at in terms of accessing the factors that lead to change in strategic objectives is to look at extending what we've discussed in task 1.1 and 1.2, but with examples as a named organization we need to do. So some of the external factors that we need to look at some frameworks like the market-based view MBV framework, which normally suggests that market conditions tend to play a very pivotal role in driving the strategic objectives of the organization. We look at regulatory changes. So one of the big regulatory change that I can point out was GDPR, when how the data of the customers is stored, accessed, retrieved, and what is the access level permissions which people will have within the organization to get access to that data. So the main change in this case was to restrict access to the data of the consumer being sold to third-party agencies in order to let's say preserve data protection and also look at privacy for an individual. So companies like Facebook, LinkedIn have to now store data within the European geography in order to, offer these services to customers. Their data cannot be stored in servers outside the UK or in the European geography, in the US or in other places. And that is where this mandated that privacy and data protection was taken very seriously when we talked about some of these external factors which were brought in as changes, regulatory changes by the European government and obviously other governments within the European region. We look at economic conditions, so things like fluctuation in currency rates, recession, inflation, Bank of England base rate and other European Central Bank base rates. If they increase, if they decrease, what kind of an effect does it have on the regulatory or the workings of the organization? And those are what are covered in the external factors. In the internal factors, we are looking at resource constraints. That means organizations, if they use resources, there are always constraints. Financial resources, administrative, human capital, physical assets, they're all resources which can put a constraint on how the businesses work. And in such cases, you would look at, these constraints being there. You have organizational culture as a point. You have strategic leadership. You have obviously failures, which could happen because of policy changes not being implemented properly. And they would all be covered in accessing the factors that might lead to change of the objectives of the organization. So I hope this particular session has been useful, which allows us to cover learning outcome 1 in great amount of detail. There is a bit of reading that you can do in the business environment book, which is given on Moodle. And that book, wherein chapter 3 could be looked at along with various handouts. to essentially, develop a deeper understanding of what we've discussed today. So thank you so much for joining, and I will catch up with you in the next session. Until then, bye for now.